Well, here we are. Hello, hi, how are you? Welcome on back in to another podcast by George. This is a live line. We're going live today because we've got a very special guest. We've Dr. Glenn Hurst on the podcast by George live line. He's running for U.S. Senate against Chuck Grassley, and he's just not running for Senate. He's a progressive. Now, he's a Democrat. We're going to talk about that a little bit because progressivism to me and progressive to somebody else might be two different things. And I want to talk to him about that in particular. And there are going to be a lot of people in the race running against Grassley this time because he's viewed as being vulnerable. I mean, people think he could be beaten. He hasn't, I don't think he's announced yet that he's actually going to run again. I think he's expected to. But folks, the dude is 87 years old. And the way that I put it to people, if you've got relatives or you've got friends that are 87 years old, man, I love them. And I love their experience and their knowledge. And I love to sit down and talk to them. And I'm sure that you do too. But the point of the matter is, I'm 65 years old. I'm not as good as I used to be, folks, at much of anything. I mean, my hockey teammates can tell you that for sure. I'm not as good at, my cognitive abilities, my reading, my command of the facts, anything like that. I know that for sure. I'm probably not as good a broadcaster as I used to be. Well, that's at 65. And Chuck Grassley is 87 years old. And it's time for a change. I mean, there are some major crises in the world that need to be dealt with ASAP, or it's going to be game over, in my opinion. We talk about that all the time on the podcast, and we need more than a breath of fresh air. We need a real progressive. So I'm delighted that you're joining us today. There's a chat function on this live broadcast. So if you have questions or comments for either me or for the good doctor, please chat. I mean, use that function and we'll throw those comments in there. But without further ado, let's bring him on in and welcome him to the podcast by George live line. Dr. Hurst, welcome.
Hi, thank you very much. It's great to be here.
I'm glad to have you on. I've got a little bio here, and I'll read that quickly to cover some bases. It reads, Dr. Glenn Hurst, he's a Democrat. He operates a private medical practice in Minden, Iowa. Now, that's a small town there. Even Iowans may not realize where that's at, but that's out in western Iowa. And the way I describe it to people, I mean, it's, you can not see Council Bluffs from there, but it's pretty close. It's south of that I-80 corridor. And that's significant because south of I-80, the way that I think of it, Cindy Axne, the Democrat representative, she wins. North of I-80, no Democrat ever wins. Up in the northwestern quadrant of the state up there, whatever that section is, I mean, that's Steve King country. So he's close to that where he's located. And for folks that might want to know, he was involved in the founding of a branch of Indivisible. That's a progressive activist organization in western Iowa. Republican Chuck Grassley, 87, as I mentioned, currently holds the U.S. Senate seat. He was first elected to that office in 1980. Glenn, I got to say this, and I've mentioned this all the time on my podcast. People wonder what's wrong with America. Where did we go wrong? Well, you can trace back, in my opinion, what's wrong with America right to 1980, because what coincides with 1980? The rise of Reaganism. And Ronald Reagan and Chuck Grassley was a part of that. And he's still there. Reagan is long gone, but Reaganism is still a huge part of this country. And that's why I got so excited to hear that a progressive, a true progressive, was coming into this race.
Well, I'll tell you, I agree 100%. If trickle down economics worked, we would have cured cancer by now and not be sending billionaires in space planes. That is the example of how trickle down economics didn't work. If that's happening, something's wrong.
Well, let me ask you this now to lay the groundwork a little bit, because I'm a lefty. I'm on the left side of the Democratic Party right now. The way I describe it to people, and again, going back to 1980, Reagan swept into power. He got 2 terms. I mean, he changed the landscape of America, hopefully not forever, but up until the present day. The impact was immense. Well, the Democrats, in my view, Dr. Hurst, started chasing those Reagan Democrats, those people that defected from the Democratic Party starting in 1980, and maybe even some of the George Wallace type Dixiecrats. And they have been chasing those people ever since, trying to get them back voting Democrat. What has the result of that been? The Democratic Party has been chasing itself to the right, and it's been pushing the Republicans, actually, in my opinion, further right until the crazy train has stopped at the QAnon station for the Republican Party. That's basically what started. Well, the net result is the Democratic Party today, in my opinion, what I say on the podcast all the time is what a moderate Republican would have been maybe when Chuck Grassley took office. That's what the Democrats have become. Progressives, even, a lot of times, in my view, they identify as progressives, but they're not progressives. And I describe it this way. People say, well, I'm LGBTQ. I support that. I'm a progressive. No, you're not. Not if you don't support the other progressive issues. I mean, that single issues are not what progressivism is all about. You can be a BLM supporter. That's wonderful. That's great. Man, I love you for that. But that doesn't make you a progressive if you're not for climate change mitigation, real Green Deal type things. I mean, and you can be a Green Deal advocate and you can still not be a progressive if you're pro-war, these regime change wars. And maybe the bottom line is, I have a lot of friends this way, they're feminists, and I like to consider myself a feminist even. But just because you're a feminist doesn't necessarily mean you're a progressive unless you hold all of these ideas dear in aggregate.
I can only rubber stamp that. I actually had considered a run against Joni Ernst in the last cycle. And I thought about it, and I thought I would feel uncomfortable being the only feminist up on the debate stage with Joni Ernst. But you're right. I mean, it is a whole package. I got a friend here who's really desperate today. Sorry.
Yeah, that's all right. I love it. Yeah.
That cat hates me otherwise.
I love cats. Yeah.
So yeah, I think there is a whole package of progressivism that needs to be addressed. And you mentioned climate. I've said it before. I really believe every issue we talk about really has got to be built. It's got to start from a foundation of climate. It's like organizing an event. If you're organizing an event and you're not reaching out to communities of color and being wise about your having interpretation, and you've just got to start at a baseline of inclusivity. If you're not starting at inclusivity, if it's something you think about on the backside, then you don't get inclusivity. And climate's the same way. If you don't have climate laying right up front as you talk about healthcare, as you talk about justice, as you talk about jobs, then you just don't get it.
Well, let me go to the what a lot of people kind of identify you with, which is Medicare for all. And I think it's because you're a doctor, obviously.
Sure.
But Medicare for all is huge. I mean, I don't want to understate the significance of Medicare for all. It's a really big deal, particularly in a pandemic. And I raised hell about the fact when the CARES package and the support came down from the government that they didn't at least give us Medicare for all on a temporary basis. And it would have been great if they had, because people would see how well it works and how it saves lives. And coming to that, here's a reason that Medicare for all is so important. And this didn't get reported much. It's not getting much coverage, particularly here in the state of Iowa. And I'll bring this chart up on page here. Let's see if we have any luck with this. Okay, so this is a chart, and this comes from Johns Hopkins University data. Now, it's a little bit dated, but it's significance, and it shows the impact of health insurance gaps on COVID-19 cases and deaths from the start of the pandemic through August 31st of 2020. Now, the caveat, or what they say down here at the bottom, is the majority of COVID-19 cases and deaths took place after the period analyzed by McLaughlin and colleagues. So that's who created the chart. That's who did the survey. If the pandemic continued to fit the patterns uncovered by the researchers from the pandemic start through February 1st, 2021, health insurance gaps were associated with an estimated 10.9 million of 25.9 million COVID-19 infections. Now, get this, 143,000 of the 437,000 COVID-19 deaths directly attributable to the lack of Medicare for all or health insurance gaps. And of course, if Medicare for all were true Medicare for all, there wouldn't be any of those health insurance gaps. And as many as, I don't know, maybe now 200,000 people have died because of that. I mean, that is alarming. And I mean, that is really an eye opener. And that really speaks to the significance of the importance of this Medicare for all issue.
Absolutely. You're right. Everyone expects me to come out swinging with Medicare for all, and I do, because I do believe it's got to be a pillar of any campaign for the U.S. Senate. If you're not able to say I support Medicare for all out loud, I don't know if you should be running as a Democrat. Which lives are expendable in this scenario? If you feel that there are lives that are expendable, I'd like to know which ones those are, because there's no American life that's just expendable that we can just write off, which is the system that we operate under currently. Under our current system, some people are going to die, and it's the people who don't have good insurance coverage, just like you showed in the chart. That's absolutely what happens.
Well, let's drill down on this a little bit. And I'm glad we're talking about Medicare for all. We just had a rally in all 50 states, or 50 cities, actually, around the country had a Medicare for all rally for the very reason that I just cited. I mean, that's got to be we're talking life and death, folks. That's a major reason to have these rallies. Well, and again, Dr. Hurst, now we're going to talk about the Democratic Party a little bit. I know that you were a part of this, but as far as our elected representatives in Washington are concerned, not a single one of them attended or supported these rallies. Cori Bush, my understanding is, went to one in Washington, D.C., but she didn't speak in support. As a matter of fact, I think she said that she didn't support it. The squad, people that got elected on campaigning and raising lots of money, folks. We're talking millions, tens of millions of dollars, because they supported Medicare for all, not attending these rallies. So this gets to kind of where I wanted to get with you. You're a Democrat. You're within the Democratic Party. You're wanting to go to Washington and join these people. How are we going to get anything done with that being the backdrop?
Sure. Well, it's great coming as an outsider, right? I'm not beholden to a single person in Washington, D.C., and I have no interest in being beholden to a single person in Washington, D.C. I certainly haven't received a call from Chuck Schumer offering money for our campaign. We are truly a grassroots campaign. Honestly, I'm just the face that has risen out of the movement that I've been involved with for the last 4 years. And I am far more interested in representing the movement than I am interested in towing party line. Now, there's a certain amount of cooperation that has to happen in Washington to get things done. But I think we need to be very careful about words like compromise. We've got a two-party system, which is a problem from the very start. What that means is there's only two ways we're going to look at a problem, and that's not how we do it. I start from a position that Medicare for all is the solution for rural Iowa, for all Americans. And how are we going to achieve that? That's the place where we start to move around, and we better be able to look at it from more than two directions. We need to look at it from a third direction and a fourth direction. I'm willing to find the right way to make that happen, but I'm not willing to just buy into the party line or sell out half the party line in order to get the other side to come halfway as well. There is a solution for all Americans to all problems, and we can come to it if we're not coming to it with our hands bound by these party loyalties.
Well, let's get to the brass tacks of this a little bit, because I mean, this comes right to the heart of your candidacy and the prospects for you having success. We're talking federally now. Let's talk about the state of Iowa, Dr. Hurst. And this state is basically running both these political parties, in my opinion, in this state are run by two major corporate concerns, big ag and big insurance. And big insurance does not want Medicare for all. They do not want candidates saying things like what you just said.
They don't want, you said they don't want Medicare for all. They don't want health care for anyone. Every time they pay a health care bill, yes, that's money out of their pocket.
So how do you, again, I guess this is the mountain that you've got to climb. I'll give you an example here, that kind of a personal circumstance made me think, while you were talking, I had a friend of mine, God rest his soul, a great attorney here in central Iowa, and he basically quit his practice and moved away. And I asked him why, and he said, George, he says, when it comes time to impanel a jury, you know who I get? I mean, who the jury selection pool, what it's comprised of? Republican insurance people. And he says, I can't get a fair trial for my defendants. I mean, I cannot get a jury. And this guy was a good attorney to win a trial with. And I mean, he didn't give up on anything. My God, this guy was tough. And he eventually said, no mas, no mas, when he was 50 some years old, and moved out of the state. So, I mean, and the climate issue that we talked about in big ag, I mean, you've got some real hurdles. And I guess you would say that your support is going to come not from those special interest groups and those corporations, but it's going to come from people like the people that live in Minden, Iowa, as an example.
Yeah, well, you say we have big hurdles, and I would agree with that if I were approaching this from a how do Democrats win rural voters position, and that is not the position I come from. The position I come from is having lived a rural life and heard from rural people, grown a movement out of rural Iowa, and bringing forward what rural Iowans need. We're not going to talk about being, what lane do you fit in? Are you the Democrat? Are you the Republican? We're going to talk about how do we create jobs. Chuck Grassley has been in the U.S. Senate for greater than 40 years. And all you have to do is look at your community and answer the question, has it grown? And it hasn't. It hasn't grown. We don't have new people. We don't have new employers. As a matter of fact, most of our rural communities, our counties under 70,000 people or under 80,000 people, 70 of those counties have shrunk. We've even seen Pottawatomie County, 90,000 people, has failed to grow in the last 10 years at all and has actually shrunk. So I'm not worried about convincing the insurance industry or the ag industry to do anything. I can work with the people who work in those industries, and we know what needs to be done. Big insurance industries have CEOs that should be concerned, but their employees should not be concerned. Medicare for All has so many opportunities to take people from doing exactly what they're doing now and moving them into a position where they can do it better, more efficiently, and help more people. People want Medicare for All. We just have to deliver it.
That's key. You just hit on something again that does not get very much coverage, doesn't get much discussion, and that is, what about all of the people, and it's a huge employment sector, folks, that are currently involved with private insurance, and how are we going to pay for it? People remember Bernie Sanders getting badgered about that. And I want to bring this next up on screen. We can talk about that here. Let me.
Sure. Well, yeah. Well, you pull that up. I would just say my personal experience as a physician has taught me that the bureaucracy of an insurance industry puts the U.S. bureaucracy to shame. talk about a wasteful program, talk about running you in circles and getting nothing done. I'm a private practice. It's me and my medical assistant most of the time. And I will personally sit on the phone for a half hour working my way through the automated system, sitting on hold, waiting to get authorization for a medication or an answer to a question that is as simple as this could have been posted on a website. But their intention is to prevent you from being able to access information. The hope is that you give up and don't try to advocate for your patient so that the money stays in the wallet. So we've got to address that.
Well, I got that to come up on the screen a little bit. Let me go back to that here because this is something, I mean, this is right from your hymnal, obviously. I know that you'll want to comment on this and bring this up. Now, this is a fact check, and this was originally published in Public Citizen. It says Medicare for All would save the U.S. trillions. Public option would leave millions uninsured. You hear about the public option all the time, not garner savings. This reads, Medicare for All opponents repeatedly claim that Medicare for All is too expensive. My God, have we heard that? By presenting misleading numbers without the proper context of our unsustainable healthcare spending. Now, here are the facts. We can't afford not to implement Medicare for All. Our healthcare spending is estimated to continue rising, if you can believe that. It'll reach nearly $6 trillion a year by 2027. That means, according to the federal government, we will spend around $42.9 trillion on healthcare over the next decade if we maintain the status quo. And Glenn, I always like to tell people to kind of get a visual on $1 trillion because we're talking trillions here. $1 trillion is a stack of $1,000 bills, which they don't make, but if they did, a stack of $1,000 bills 67 miles high. People have no idea the kind of money that we're talking about here. And that kind of goes to the heart of the modern monetary theory and the fact that none of this is real. Yeah, this is purposeful and trying to keep us in line and under control by the oligarchy. But, that's a subject for another day. Now, the next headline, Medicare for All will cost less than our current system. A recent study by Yale epidemiologists found that Medicare for All would save around $68,000 lives a year while reducing U.S. healthcare spending by around 13% or $450 billion a year. Medicare for All spending would be approximately $37.8 trillion between 2017 and 2026, according to a study by the Political Economy Research Institute at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. That amounts to about $5 trillion in savings over that time. In savings, these savings would come from reducing administrative costs and allowing the government to negotiate prescription drug prices. And of course, that's something our good doctor is well familiar with, drug prices. So let me bring that down. The thing I think about that, Dr. Hurst, when I see that graphic, I'll never forget the last presidential debates with all of our good Democrats on stage, and they were hammering Bernie about Medicare for All, most notably Joe Biden. How are we going to pay for it? How are we going to pay for it? Well, there are the facts, but here's the thing. Bernie knows that stuff. I know he knows that stuff. I don't know if he got flummoxed. I don't know if he forgot where he was at under the glare of the television lights or whatever, but Bernie didn't counter that very well. Medicare, it didn't counter it at all. Medicare for All will save us money, will save us big money, trillions of dollars, miles high, $1,000 bills, for God's sake. But hardly anybody brings that up.
Yeah, I think you've almost proven the point in what you presented there. That was a lot of data and a lot of numbers that were very compelling to people who want to hear data and count numbers and pay attention to that. And honestly, the American public is just busy trying to put food on the table for their family. We've got 50,000 Iowans right now facing possible eviction because the eviction moratorium has passed and our governor didn't move on it, and our senators didn't take it up in Congress and make it extended. So people are really worried about bread and butter and trying to figure out what $1 trillion is to them. It's just not the conversation to have. The the fact is, most Americans believe this country is exceptional, and that we have some of the brightest and best thinkers, economists, inventors, scientists in the world are here, and they come here, and to a point that's probably true. So all we have to share is, look, we are 9th or 10th out of industrialized countries around the world in terms of the quality of our healthcare, and we pay double what all of those countries pay in healthcare expenses to get that low quality. There are examples of other places doing just what we're talking about and doing it better, and we should swallow our pride and follow their lead.
Well, exceptional country. People believe that. I'm beginning to think less all the time that way. I got to admit, one of the ways that we're really falling down on the job is this healthcare circumstance. It's because the rest of the world is leading the way. The United States is kind of standing alone in the corner here, literally dying because we don't have a form of government-paid healthcare in this country like the rest of the industrialized world does. And we mentioned the pandemic. My God, if you're ever going to get it, this would certainly be the time. Why we can't push for it more loudly and get our elected representatives to act more boldly during this pandemic on Medicare for all, I'll never understand. But here's the other part of it. It crosses over into so many issues, and I wanted you to talk about some of those other issues. And I've got relatives out west. I got relatives in California, for instance, and a big issue out there that we don't think about very much in this part of the country, but it's homelessness. And homelessness, the number one reason that these people are on the streets is because they're broke. What's the number one cause of bankruptcy in the United States? It's medical bills. It's medical. I mean, they go broke because they have medical costs that they can't pay. What's the other reason that they're out on the streets? Well, they have mental issues, perhaps. They can't get the mental assistance they want because of our current healthcare system. Medicare for all is exactly what it sounds like. It's for everyone, and it's for all medicine and needs, basically. And it would have a lot to do with resolving a lot of the homelessness problem in this country, which a lot of people don't connect the dots.
And so much homelessness, people suffering from homelessness tend to be veterans. I mean, people that we say we really want to show our gratitude for having taken the risk to protect our country from aggression, and having seen and been involved in horrible things, which absolutely is a contributor to struggles with mental health and brain chemistry. So Medicare for all is such a beautiful opportunity to address that. The VA system in the United States is basically a national health system for veterans. Their medical records are available across the nation. If you're a veteran in Florida and you're visiting your family in Omaha and end up at the Omaha VA opens your record, and there's everything that happened to you in Florida, every test, every lab, everything. So we've got examples of how to make it work. But wouldn't it be amazing if we had Medicare for all, right? Then we wouldn't need veterans hospital system, right? Everybody would have access to that. Imagine taking that money and solving the problems of veterans homelessness by providing a monthly stipend to all veterans for rent, for house payment, for utilities, things that really affect them on a day-to-day basis, because our veterans don't go to the VA for much of their care because there's still a lot of fear and a lot of problems with that relationship between the veteran and the service, feeling that they were put in this position by the service. So this would be a wonderful opportunity to solve a huge portion of the crisis of people dealing with homelessness.
Well, I'm really glad that we're talking about defense, because that was another topic that I wanted to cover. And before we leave Medicare for all, now you got to remember, I'm a lefty. I'm an old hippie with no hair. I got a hairline like yours, Dr. Hurst. I mean,
I bet you look great.
It left a long time ago. But here's the point that I make to people. I mean, it's a crime, I think, that we continue to fund the defense system like we are, as much as $1 trillion. We have 1,000 military bases around the world, for God's sake. We're involved in 7 foreign wars most people aren't even aware of. Joe Biden, a couple of weeks ago, was bombing Somalia. And people are like, Somalia, what the hell? Aren't those the pirates? Yeah. Half the people in Somalia don't have homes. They're nomads, and we're bombing Somalia. And well, that's one of the 7 wars. And so I mean that's a crime on its on its own basis. But then the other part about it is, well, how do we continue to fight these? Well, one of the reasons we continue to fight it is because we're using a volunteer army. And we do have volunteers, probably not enough. These people are doing several tours, coming back with great harm because of that. But one of the incentives, or one of the reason for people to join the army, or the military to begin with, is this healthcare angle, because we don't have Medicare for all. They're guaranteed, if they survive, to come out of the military with these benefits. And by God, they might need them too. That's the downside of it. But one of them is healthcare through the VA, as you mentioned. And
and even beyond that, I mean, I'm the product of a military family. My father's a retired senior master sergeant. He was an electronics technician, flew in the back of spy planes and repaired electronics equipment as other people listened up and down the coasts of Russia and Southeast Asia. So, it is, and what I would add to what you were saying is that access to healthcare is not just for the person in service. Okay, it's for the entire family. I was immunized in some of the same clinics that I was trained in later as a physician, doing rotations in the military base. So the military is another great example of a national healthcare system that we already have. Employed physicians, owned hospitals. They're even more in depth than the VA in terms of their control. So it's not like we haven't done this. It's not like we don't value it. We value it so much that we try to give it to our medical folks. Imagine being able to cut that money out of the budget for the military and direct it somewhere else, because healthcare is being taken care of for every American, not just those who are willing to put their lives on the line in hopes that they survive and then have access to a decent insurance product. I say decent. There's no such thing as good healthcare. There's no such thing as a good health insurance policy. All insurance policies are meant to deny you care.
Yes.
But it's the better devil to dance with.
Well, on this topic of defense, and it's all important to me, I've got the big 3 on the podcast by George, and it's climate, and it's war, and it's healthcare. And I always use that as my prism. That's how I look at these things. And I tell people, if you think that we've gone wrong in those 3 critical areas, the big 3, the guy that's been intrinsically involved in all this, that involves the responsibility, he's 87 years old. I mean, it's Chuck Grassley. He's been at the controls since 1980. So don't get me wrong. I want to put the blame squarely there with him and people like him. But I look at Grassley and people of that group thinking, and I'm not going to make much of a change there. I can't push. I can't change any of those people. I tend to look at the Democrats. And, I do support Democrats. I vote for them. I used to give them some money. I'm going to be very reluctant to do that. And here's the best case example. And it talks about one of your opponents now, one of the people that's going to be running for you on the Democratic on the Democratic side here for Grassley's seat. And it's Abby Finkenauer. And she held a House representative seat for one term with Cindy Axne and that Lobos guy. Well, the National Defense Authorization Act comes up for funding. It includes in it a provision to increase military spending for Donald Trump to bomb the shit out of people around the world during the Trump administration, a $22 billion annual increase. And it's not just annual. These increases don't get retracted. They continue. They get built upon. They're into perpetuity, basically. Well, Finkenauer and Axne and people in the Iowa Democratic Party, they supported that. and they voted for it. And I was mortified, for God's sake. I looked at it and said, why are we doing that? There was a bill on the floor of the House to reduce spending for the military by 10%. They did not support it. That bill went nowhere. They went right there and gave that money to Trump, who now they're running around telling us is the greatest threat to democracy that there's ever been. He's an ally of Russia. He's in the pocket of Putin, and they were giving him all that money, and he blew up Syria with it, basically. Mm-hmm. So I guess my question for you is, that's long-winded like all of my questions are, but where do you come down on NDAA spending as an example? Are you for a reduction in that military spending? Would you support not an increase, but a reduction in military spending?
I think there's all kinds of ways for us to reduce military spending wisely. We certainly don't want to leave our country at risk. Defense is a very real thing and a real need. But our budget for the military is influenced by an industrial complex that is absolutely lobbying on its own behalf. War is it makes money for those folks, and we have far too many provisions within our budget that are meant specifically to provide money to foreign countries that can only spend that money buying military equipment from American military industry. So, yeah, there's absolutely room to fix that. And I would say, you're not alone, George. What's your concern and what you're sharing, and I'm not talking. Take me out of the picture completely. Iowans are not voting for middle of the road Democrats, right? We haven't been able to get a middle of the road Democrat into the Senate. We haven't been able to get a middle of the road Democrat into the governor's office. We certainly can't get any Democrats into our state house and our state Senate. Abby Finkenauer lost a blue +2 district. We've got to ask the question, is it that Iowa has swung so right that we aren't right enough? Or is it that we aren't running Democratic candidates that Democrats want to vote for? And since you asked that question, Dr. Hurst, I'll answer it. and the question, so look at the caucuses for Iowa, right? The caucuses are universally kind of agreed upon that they are not accessible. We've been working to make them more accessible, but candidates like Bernie Sanders, against Hillary Clinton, that didn't work. But look what Bernie Sanders did this last time. If you look at it by district, Bernie Sanders won the 1st, 2nd, and 4th district. Pete Buttigieg won the 3rd. That's why Cindy Axne is a great candidate for the third district. I think she kind of sits well with voters in this part of the state, Democrats in this part of the state. But the rest of the state is waiting for a Democrat to step forward and say, look, I'm going to run on Democratic values and I'm not going to compromise. I'm going to unite the Democratic base. And then we're going to go out there and we're going to convince those people who are independent that our idea is the better idea. And that's how we're going to win a race. And that's how we're going to then influence policy. But you'd better influence policy if you win that race.
Well, you raised an excellent point. It was a question that I had. I didn't know that we'd get to it, but I'm going to go ahead and pose it because here's what I think, Dr. Hurst. I think Bernie Sanders won the Iowa caucuses, I think, in 2016. I think he won them in 2020. I think Bernie, I think the handwriting was on the wall. As a matter of fact, the great Chris Hedges, that I follow very closely, the journalist, in 2016, told Bernie basically after he was stymied by and probably against rules and regulations and maybe by the law, according to WikiLeaks. And that's the reason they're persecuting Julian Assange the way they are. But Chris Hedges pointed out to Bernie in 2016, he said, Bernie, they're not going to let you win. I mean, this is an insider's game and they control the rules and you're not going to win. Now, that's bad for you, Bernie. But the point of it is if you pull this movement of yours to 2020 and you run again as a Democrat from inside the Democratic Party, the bad news is you're going to lose again in 2020, which he did. But the worst news is you're going to prevent your issues, your causes from being implemented because you're guaranteed to lose. So this goes back to kind of my standing on the window ledge like we were at the beginning of the podcast, Dr. Hurst. Does that concern you? Is this game rigged? Can you win from inside the Democratic Party?
Well, I think it helps to come from within the Democratic Party. And I've been an active member of the party. I sit on the state's central committee. I'm chair of the rural caucus. I'm chair of the 3rd district, or up until recently, I've stepped down from that role because that role should really be dedicated to helping the congressional candidate win their election, and I've got my own to win. But I worked within the party, and I have had the opportunity to demonstrate what I can do, demonstrate through my action, demonstrate through participation, and through just service to the party in general. And I think that people respect a person who shows up from the start, does it without the intention of getting something for it, and naturally is kind of put in the position to be the candidate. Like I said, this is not a candidacy that I sought. I am the face of a movement, and the movement is very alive in Iowa.
And well, it's alive and well here anyway. I hope you're true, because I hope you're right about that. I mean, because we need to make some inroads. We need to win on something, and maybe most notably is the climate change or the Green New Deal to a greater extent than what Biden is proposing. Everybody's running around talking about Biden and climate and how wonderful he's doing. Shit, that plan of his is from 1982, basically. We need something more than that. We need people in Congress like yourself that can get major changes done to keep us all alive. The climate scientists are now saying, man, it may not be the end of the century. It may not even be the end of my lifetime. Well, we could be talking 10, 15 years, 20 years, things could be getting real hairy. So before we leave here, let's talk a little bit about climate and the state of Iowa. Now, there are climate scientists, again, that are telling us that one of the biggest contributors to climate change and global warming and all these things that are killing us is animal agriculture. And of course, we're always going to have animal agriculture. Nobody's going to become vegan or vegetarian overnight. I mean, we're going to have slaughtering houses and animals, but it's these CAFOs and it's the practices that we're using and the killing of these animals that are changing the climate and fouling the waterways of this state. How do you propose to change some of that as a progressive in the U.S. Senate?
Sure. We started the conversation right around this issue, actually, because I take it back to how do we serve rural Iowans in the U.S. Senate, and a key component of rural Iowa is our environment. I mean, we're out here because we like wide open spaces. We're out here because we like to fish, we like to hunt, we like to boat and camp. We like to be outdoor people. We like to plant and grow. And rural Iowans, I went to a fish fry on Saturday, I think it was, a fish fry over in Atlantic, Iowa. And when they brought the fish out, I had to stop and ask myself, do I think that fish is safe to eat? Because it was caught in Iowa water. And it made me think about, if I'd shot a duck and it fell into the lake, would I feel comfortable letting the dog go into that water to get that duck?
Not so much, yeah.
No, not at all. And so the environment is a key component of rural Iowa living. So it's about addressing rural Iowa. And you brought up the confined animal factory farms. feeding operations. There's things we have to do. You're right. The world's not going to go vegan, but we've got to solve the problem that we have before we allow the problem to continue to grow. And our problem is already huge. We've got to stop authorizing any new capos in this state. And we've got to hold those that do exist accountable for what is happening to the environment. We have to be prepared for the reality. You brought it up 15 years from now, the reality of our problem. People think it's about gas burning automobiles. And, it's far more about our agricultural practices.
Mm-hmm.
And the gas burning automobiles are going away. Europe has already said, we're going all electric. Many US companies have already said, look, we're going all electric. And if you look at how big petroleum is spending their money, they're not spending their money to try to produce more gasoline. They're producing more plastic, which is another problem.
Uh-huh.
But we're trying to sell the idea to rural Iowa farmers. Hey, we're going to fight for ethanol tooth and nail. Ethanol isn't going to matter in 10 to 15 years because there's not going to be any petroleum to be putting it into. So we've got to change ag practices. We've got to embrace things like hemp, which grows just as well in the soil that corn grows in.
Biofuels,
yeah. We've got to look at how do we prepare the state to process hemp? How do we prepare the state to harvest? How do we help our ag community make a transition to a better, safer, more profitable product? And what I hear from our elected officials and the folks who are running for office is, I'm going to fight for your ethanol. And I'll fight for your ethanol to the point that we use combustible fuels, but that writing is on the wall, and it's not by me. It's not by Joe Biden. Your corporations have already said we're not going to be burning fuel.
Yeah, it's like saying I'm going to fight for your horse and carriage.
Right.
Well, I mean, that's great, but that game's going to be over here very shortly, folks. Yeah. And there is money, there are jobs, there is economic benefit for Iowa in these other areas, as you just delineated.
We got lots of wide open spaces where the wind blows and the sun shines.
Yeah, exactly right. Well, folks, we're going to lose him. He's a busy guy. He's a doctor, obviously, and he's also running for the U.S. Senate. He's got just a few balls in the air, obviously. He's juggling out there, and I really appreciate you coming on Podcast by George. Now, I will say this also. When I asked him to come on, he didn't do this, well, what do we want to talk about? And who are you? And what's your political perspective? And who's going to be watching? He just got, if you got questions, I got answers. Let's do it. I got 45 minutes. Let's get it on. So this is great. And I really like talking to a fellow progressive. I want to give you a last word, though. I want to give you a closer here before we end this particular edition of Podcast by George.
Well, I just thank you, George, very, very much for inviting me and having me on. And I believe that these are the types of conversations that we need to be having.
Amen.
People should be spending more time talking about the issues and less time posing for a good picture. I've sat here this whole time looking at my image going, looks kind of dark and yellow, but I'm telling you, I'm blinded by lights in here. I'm not a light designer, people. I'm a guy who has looked at rural America for I'm 50, the last 30 years of my life, and seen what's happening and seen the demise. And I think that Chuck Grassley's vision of the past has got to be replaced with a vision for the future. And I want to be that vision for you.
That's well said. That's great. Well, again, thanks for coming on. The Podcast by George live line, as I call it. And everybody that is interviewed, obviously, is live at the time. But a lot of times my podcasts are recorded and then put up. But this one is live. It's on Facebook. And if folks are joining us late, if you missed this particular edition, don't worry about it. I'm going to repost it. It'll be on YouTube, and you can also check it out on iTunes if you want to listen to the audio-only portion of the podcast. And I encourage everybody, please, not only follow us on Facebook and like us there, but subscribe on YouTube, ring that notification bell, and give us a thumbs up and subscribe on iTunes and Spotify and places like that also. Dr. Hurst, once again, thanks for coming on a podcast by George.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And thanks, everybody, for tuning in. That's going to do it for this particular edition. That's going to wrap it up. That's all there is. And there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.